A school bus driver began noticing a young girl quietly crying every afternoon on his route, her behavior growing more concerning as the days passed. One day after the drop-offs, he decided to investigate and looked under her seat, and what he discovered made him gasp. Walter Harmon adjusted his rearview mirror with a practiced flick of his wrist as the rumbling school bus made its way down the suburban streets of Willow Glen, Illinois. At 62, the retired mechanic had found an unexpected second career as a school bus driver, a job that gave his day structure and purpose. After 35 years of fixing engines and transmissions, the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the blue-gray seats. Walter glanced at his watch. 3:45 p.m. right and schedule for the afternoon drop-offs. Most of the students from Willow Glen Intermediate School chatted animatedly about weekend plans, upcoming tests, or the latest social media drama. The usual cacophony of adolescent life filled the bus, but as Walter checked his mirror again, his gaze landed on a girl sitting alone near the front. She sat just 3 seats back in the road, directly above the air vent, her face partially hidden by strands of brown hair. Her shoulders were hunched forward, and though she tried to hide it, Walter could see her hand occasionally coming up to wipe away tears. This was the 3rd day in a row he had noticed her crying, always in the same pattern, quiet and reserved when the bus was full, gradually letting her guard down as students departed at their stops. Walter frowned concern, etching deeper lines into his weathered face. He had been driving this route long enough to recognize the signs of a troubled kid looking down at his clipboard where he kept the student roster. He confirmed what he already knew. Her name was Rory Carson, class 9B. She had only been enrolled at Willow Glen for 2 weeks. The first week, Walter hadn't thought much of her quiet demeanor. New students often kept to themselves until they found their footing, but this second week had shown a disturbing pattern, and today seemed particularly bad. 5th Street. Coming up, Walter called out as he slowed for the stop. 2 boys grabbed their backpacks and made their way to the front, thanking Walter. As they stepped off the bus, he watched them walk toward their homes before closing the door and continuing on his route. With each stop, the bus grew emptier, and Walter continued stealing glances at Rory through his mirror. There were only 5 students left now, and Rory's stop was the last on his route. As the bus emptied further, her silent tears became more evident. At one point, Walter noticed something peculiar as he navigated. Pattern. Rory suddenly slouched forward, her hand disappearing beneath the seat. Walter couldn't see clearly what she was doing. He needed to keep his eyes on the road, but it appeared she was examining the air vent under the seat. A metallic clang echoed through the now quiet bus. "Everything all right back there?" Walter called, concerned. Rory's head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise. "Yes," she said quickly, her voice barely audible. "Sorry, I dropped my tissue." Walter nodded and returned his attention to the road, but something felt off. He drew a long contemplative breath. Yesterday, he had tried to strike up a conversation with the girl, asking about her classes and how she was settling in, but she had offered only one-word responses. Before retreating back into silence after dropping off the remaining Walter finally approached Rory's stop, a modest 2-story house with faded blue siding at the end of Maple Drive. As he pulled the bus to a stop, Walter made a decision. He couldn't just ignore what he was seeing day after day. "Last stop," he announced, opening the door. Rory gathered her pink backpack and stood, her movement sluggish as shapest. Walter, he noticed her red-rimmed eyes and the dark circles beneath them. "Have a good evening, Rory," he said with a gentle smile. She nodded, without making eye contact, and stepped off the bus. To her visible surprise, Walter followed her, stepping down onto the sidewalk. "Why are you following me?" she asked, her voice tinged with alarm. Walter held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I can't help but notice you've been upset on the bus lately," he said. "It's happened several times now. I just wanted to make sure with your parents that everything's okay." Fear flashed across Rory's face, though she quickly tried to mask it. "No need for that," she insisted, her voice rising slightly. "It's nothing big. School's just been hard, and I miss my friends from my previous school." Walter studied her face, uncertain. His decades of life experience told him there was more to the story, but he didn't want to push too hard and scar her. "I understand," he said, "but sometimes it helps." To the front door of the house swung open, suddenly cutting him off. A man stepped out onto the porch, his expression impassive. "Rory," he called sharply, "come inside." Rory shot Walter a look thought seemed almost pleading before rushing toward the house. Her footsteps hurried across the concrete walkway. The man's attention turned to Walter. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his tone neutral but somehow unwelcoming. Walter hesitated for a moment before deciding to approach. He walked up the path toward the porch, stopping a respectful distance away. "No problem, sir," Walter said. "I'm Walter Harmon, Rory's bus driver. I just wanted to check in because I've noticed she seems upset on the ride home lately." The man's expression didn't change. "I'm Greg Whitmore, Rory's stepfather," he said. "Her mother isn't right now?" Walter nodded. "I just wanted to let you know that Rory's been crying on the bus. I was concerned something might be troubling her." Greg's face softened slightly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Her grandmother passed away recently," he explained. "It's been hard on all of us, but especially on Rory. They were close. She'll get over it, hopefully." "I'm very sorry to hear that," Walter said, feeling a twinge of relief that there was an explanation. "Please accept my condolences. Didn't mean to intrude." "Thanks," Greg said, already turning away. "Have a good day." Before Walter could finish wishing them a good evening, in return the door closed with a decisive click, walking back to his bus. Walter couldn't shake an nagging feeling of unease. The explanation made sense, but something about his demeanor felt off. There was no trace of grief in his voice when he mentioned the grandmother's death, and he had seemed awfully quick to dismiss. Walter, maybe I'm overthinking it, Walter muttered to himself as he climbed back into the driver's seat. Man could just be busy, or pervade. Still, as he started the engine and pulled away from the curb, the image of Rory's pleading look stayed with him. Walter drove the bus back to the station, navigating the familiar streets on autopilot, while his mind remained preoccupied with Rory. The afternoon sun was beginning to descend, casting long shadows across the neighborhood. As he pulled into the school bus depot after parking in his designated spot, Walter began his end-of-day routine. He walked the length of the bus, checking each seat for forgotten items and collecting the inevitable assortment of trash, crumpled homework assignments, empty chip bags, and half-finished water bottles. He placed each item into the garbage bag he always kept on hand, moving methodically from the back of the bus toward the front. When he reached the front seats, Walter paused. This was where Rory had been, sitting right above the air vent. He recalled the clang he'd heard and her hurried explanation about dropping a tissue. Looking at the seat now, he realized he hadn't seen her with any tissues when she left the bus. Maybe she'd put it in her pocket. But Walter's instincts told him to investigate further. He crouched down, his knees protesting with a dull ache. The floor around the seat appeared clean, no tissues or obvious debris. Walter's attention turned to the air vent itself. It was securely fastened to the floor, but as he examined it more closely, he noticed a small gap between the vent and the seat base. Let's see what we have here, he murmured, reaching his fingers into the narrow space. His fingertips brushed against something smooth and unfamiliar. With some effort, Walter managed to extract a small plastic package. When he pulled it out into the light, his breath caught in his throat. It was a blister pack of pink pills, partially used. Walter turned to each over in his hand, studying the unfamiliar medication. The brand name was printed on the back along with dosage information. What in the world? Walter pulled out his phone and quickly searched for the drug name online. His eyes widened as he read the search results. They were pregnancy prevention pills. Birth control. Walter sat heavily in the driver's seat, staring at the package in his hand. A 14 or 15-year-old girl was hiding birth control pills under her seat on the school bus. Combined with her crying and withdrawn behavior, it painted a concerning picture. Walter took several photos of the pills with his phone, carefully documenting what he'd found and where. Then he tucked the pills into his waist bag, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. This wasn't something he could ignore. With slightly trembling fingers, Walter located the principal's contact information in his phone and attached photos to a message. Found these hidden under a seat on my bus today. They belong to a student. Please advise on next steps. After sending the message, Walter waited a moment, but no immediate response came. Growing increasingly anxious, he decided to call the principal directly. After 3 rings, a tour voice answered. This is Principal Daniels. Hello, sir. This is Walter Harmon, bus driver for Route 14. The principal's sigh was audible through the phone. Mr. Harmon, I'm currently in a meeting with school board. Is this urgent? I believe it is, sir. I just sent you some photos. I haven't had a chance to check my messages, Principal. Daniels cut in, his voice strained with impatience. How important could it be? How important could it be? It can't wait until after my meeting. Walter hesitated, unsure how much to say over the phone. I found some concern on the bus that belongs to one of your students. I think you should take a look as soon as possible. Look at whatever you sent after my meeting, the principal responded, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. I don't like to be disturbed unless there's a genuine emergency. The call ended abruptly, leaving Walter staring at his phone in frustration. He had expected more urgency from the principal, especially given the nature of his discovery. Guess I'll have to handle this myself for now, Walter muttered, pocketing his phone and gathering his belongings. Walter returned the bus key at the station office, clocked out, and headed to the parking lot where his old Buick waited. The car had seen better days. The blue paint was fading, and there was a persistent rattle in the engine, but it had been with him for 15 years. Sand still ran reliably enough. As he pulled out of the station, Walter's mind churned with indecision. He knew his route home would take him right past Rory's house. Part of him felt compelled to stop there again to show the stepfather what he'd found and ensure the girl was safe, but the memory of Greg Whitmore's dismissive attitude gave him pause. Maybe he doesn't even know, Walter reasoned aloud as he drove. Could be the girls taking them in secret past the turnoff to Maple Drive where Rory's house stood, then slowed his conscience nagging at him. After a moment's hesitation, he made a U-turn at the next intersection and headed back, pulling up in front of the modest blue house. Walter took a deep breath to steady his nerves. He wasn't looking forward to another interaction with Greg Whitmore, but his concern for Rory outweighed his discomfort. He approached the door and knocked firmly. No response came. He waited a reasonable interval before knocking again, this time a bit louder still. Nothing. Walter peered through the front window. The house was dark inside. No signs of movement or light appeared. No one was home despite it being less than an hour since he dropped Rory offered. Turning to his car, Walter pulled out the emergency contact list he kept for all the students. On his route, he located Rory's information and found the contact number listed under Greg Whitmore's name. He dialed the number, but after several rings it went to voicemail. Strange. Walter Mutzer hanging up without leaving a message. Where could they have gone so quickly? With a sigh, he started his car again and continued his journey home. He had done what he could for now. Perhaps the principal would call him back soon, or he could try contacting Rory's family again later. Walter had driven only a few miles when he spotted a familiar figure emerging from the pharmacy on Cedar Street. It was Rory walking alone. She looked miserable, one arm wrapped around her stomach. As if in pain. Without thinking twice, Walter pulled over to the curb and got out of his car. Rory, he called softly, not wanting to startle her. The girl looked up, surprise and weariness crossing her face. When she recognized him, she stopped walking, but maintained her distance. Are you all right? Walter asked, noticing her pallid complexion. You look like you're in pain. I'm fine, she said flatly, though her posture suggested otherwise. Walter glanced around. Where's your stepfather? Did he drop you off here? That's not your business, Rory replied, her voice hardening. What do you want from me? Walter raised his hands in a non-threatening gesture. I'm just concerned about you. That's all. I've been driving school buses for years and I can tell when a student is having a tough time. Rory shifted, uncomfortably clutching her stomach tighter. I said, I'm fine. Please leave me alone. Before Walter could respond, a middle-aged couple walking past slowed their pace, looking between him and Rory with concern. Everything okay here? The man asked, directing the question to Rory. The girl hesitated, then said in a quiet voice, he scares me. The couple immediately stepped between Walter and Rory, their posture protective. Sir, I think you should leave, the woman said firmly. Walter felt his face flush with embarrassment and frustration. I'm her school bus driver. I was just checking if she needed help. She clearly doesn't want your help, the man replied. Move along before you call the police. Seeing no way to explain himself without making the situation worse, Walter reluctantly returned to his car. As he pulled away from the curb, he glanced in his rearview mirror and saw that the couple had already continued walking, leaving Rory alone. Once again he slowed his car, watching as Rory suddenly bent over a nearby garbage bin and retched violently. Something is very wrong here, Walter muttered, feeling increasingly troubled. His first instinct was to call the police, but what would he tell them? That a girl said she was scared of him, they found birth control pills, and now she was throwing up. He had no concrete evidence of any immediate danger, and involving the authorities without talking to the parents first could create unnecessary. Walter decided to keep an eye on Rory from a distance. He parked his car across the street, feeling uncomfortable about essentially stalking a young girl, but convinced that his intentions were pure. If he saw anything truly alarming, he wouldn't. From his vantage point, Walter watched as Rory composed herself and walked unsteadily toward a small liquor store at the end of the block. Shetty sappered inside, and Walter waited, occasionally checking his phone for any response from the principal. About 10 minutes movement at the store caught Walter's attention. Rory emerged, but she wasn't alone. Greg Whitmore followed her out, turning to lock the door behind him, and flipped the sign from open to closed. Walter realized it, thought, Greg must own or work at the liquor store, explaining why he hadn't been home earlier. The two walked to a sedan parking nearby. Through his car window, Walter observed Greg hand something to Rory, tottering. From this distance, he couldn't tell if it was alcohol or something innocent like water or soda. The girl took it without enthusiasm, keeping her gaze downward. Walter's finger hovered over the emergency call button on his phone. Should he call the police? What if was overreacting, and there was a perfectly innocent explanation for everything he'd seen? But what if Hewitt and Rory was in real danger? As he debated with himself, Greg's car pulled away from the curb. Making a split-second decision, Walter started his engine. He would follow them just to make sure Rory was safe, and meanwhile keep trying to reach someone in authority who could help. As Walter followed Greg's sedan at a discreet distance, he racked his brain for other ways to help. Rory, the principal, hadn't responded to his message, but perhaps there was some Neils at the school he could contact with one eye on the road ahead. Walter scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for Rory's homeroom teacher, Miss Margaret. He had met her at the beginning of the school year during the staff orientation day and remembered her as a caring educator. He put the phone on speaker and placed it in the cup holder. As it rang, hello, a female voice answered after the third ring. Miss Margaret, this is Walter Harmon, the driver for bus route 14. Yes, Mr. Harmon, is everything all right? Their voice held a note of surprise at receiving a call from a bus driver. I'm calling about one of your students, Rory Carson, Walter explained, keeping his voice low even though there was no way Greg or Rory could hear him from the other car. Have you noticed anything unusual about her behavior lately? There was a pause before Ms. Margaret responded, her tone more serious. Actually, yes, Chevery. Quiet, never approaches any of the other students for friendship, and she's been excusing herself to the restroom multiple times during class. Walter nodded to himself, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Anything else today? She seemed particularly unwell, Miss Margaret continued. I suggested she go to the clinic, but apparently she went to the theater room instead and fell asleep. One of the drama teachers found her there later. Did you report this to Principal Daniels? Walter asked, carefully maintaining his distance from Greg's car as they turned onto the highway. Yes, but he dismissed it as typical new student rebellion. Said he'd deal with her tomorrow. After his meeting with the school board, Ms. Margaret paused. Why are you asking about this? Harmon, has something happened on your bus? Walter took a deep breath. I found something under Rory's seat today. He briefly pulled over to send Ms. Margaret the same photos he'd sent to the principal. I'm sending you pictures now. He heard the soft ping of a received message, then silence, as Ms. Margaret presumably examined the images. Our birth control pills, she finally said, her voice hushed with concern. Where exactly? Did you find these hidden under the seat where Rory always sits? Walter confirmed, based on what I've observed and what you've just told me. I'm very worried about her. This is serious, Ms. Margaret agreed. Parents need to know about this immediately. I've been trying to reach them, Walter explained, describing his earlier visit to their home and his current situation following Greg's car. I'm considering calling the police, but I'm not sure if that's the right move yet. Please don't call the police just yet, Ms. Margaret urged. Principal Daniels would be furious if we involved law enforcement without his approval. We should try to handle this internally first. I'll see if I can find the mother's contact information in our system. Walter noticed that Greg's car was now heading toward the outskirts of town, away from residential areas. They're driving to the edge of town now. He reported, I'm going to stay with them and make sure Rory's safe. Be careful, Walter, Miss Margaret cautioned. Keep me updated, and I'll try to reach the mother. After ending the call, Walter focused on maintaining a